So, where we left off in part one, we were just beginning to talk about our simple model of supply and demand in the market economy. And we had reviewed at the end of the first part the idea of diminishing marginal return. And what that illustrates for us is the essence of part of the law of supply and demand, which is that uh, because consumers can get declining satisfaction from the consumption of the same item over and over again, the demand curve that we depict in the market economy is downwardly sloping. Now, when we talk about microeconomics and we um, go into the details of markets and market structures, we go sort of way beyond what I'm talking about here this evening. But the idea is that there is some responsiveness of demand to declines in price. We refer to that as the elasticity of demand of a particular item. And that over time, consumers will want to expand their capability of buying items uh, based on sort of their implicit or explicit budget constraint. The same rules apply, by the way, in economics. We talk about this. The diminishing marginal return related to the application of particular resources to a production process. Um, but for tonight's purpose, we want to just be aware of the downwardly sloping demand curve. Because sort of the fundamental assumption in economics is that consumers are entities that are trying to maximize their satisfaction, whereas producers are entities that are trying to maximize their profitability. And that that gives us the idea of an intersecting point in a market, which is an equilibrium, where supply is equal to demand, and that would determine the market price and the product availability at that particular market price. Now, we all know there are lots of problems with this simple model, but it illustrates a point that we've seen in stark uh, numbers today, Monday, April 20th, as I'm speaking about these issues, and that's the rather dramatic price decline that we saw for oil. Um, the There are a couple of types of oil that are frequently used as uh, price mechanisms for viewing the worldwide price of oil. There's oil from the North Sea area, which is Brent crude, and then there's oil that comes from the western United States, which is called West Texas Intermediate crude. And oil, not to dwell on the point too much, is it's not all the same. There are different types of oil used for different purposes. But West Texas Intermediate is an important benchmark price, and today, for contracts for the delivery of oil next month, these contracts are futures contracts that you would buy today to purchase oil that is delivered in May. Those contracts have to be settled sometime this week. The technical details don't matter that much. But at some point today, a barrel of oil, following those set of rules, had a price below zero, meaning that the demand was so low for this oil that people who were producing it basically had to pay folks for the cost of storage for the oil to be sold on the market. And so this is it's a very dramatic indication of the supply and demand dynamics for a particular market. Oil is particular interest for this particular kind of model because, to some degree, oil prices are reflective of the dynamics of a market for what we refer to as a commodity. So that's something that folks buy on open markets where the prices are well known, where the products are not differentiated, and if you try to sell this non-differentiated product at a price above the market price, nobody would really be willing to buy. And so this equilibrium price for the market, which is well known because it's updated second to second, governs the types of transactions which occur. But again, if we look at this graphic representation of the market, it tells us a couple of things which are important. One is that there are people who would be interested in purchasing the product, but not at the equilibrium price. So that's the sort of the bottom right-hand side of the demand curve, are those people who can't have their demand satisfied because the market equilibrium price is too high. But similarly, there are people who would be willing to pay more than the market equilibrium price, which is the upper left-hand side of the demand curve. And those folks are generating a surplus of satisfaction because the money they're saving on this particular item that they can use to satisfy their demand for other items or for savings. It works the same on the supply side. So you'll see that there are, in the lower left-hand corner of the supply curve, there are folks who'd be willing to pay or to supply the commodity at a lower price, who are making out because the market equilibrium price is higher. And there are other people who aren't interested in the market unless prices were higher. And we're going to see this dynamic play out in the oil market here in the near future, because even for future months, so the contract for oil delivery for June is still at a very, very low price. It was about $25 a barrel today, I think, which indicates that many mechanisms in the United States for extracting oil are going to become relatively expensive, and the equilibrium price for the market is going to cut off a bunch of potential suppliers who aren't going to be able to generate the right kind of profit or return on investment by supplying oil. So this is an indication of this sort of fundamental principle in the market, which we'll return to as we talk about macro issues with the subsequent lectures. Now, there's another important concept behind economics that I want to get across to folks this evening, because we'll return to this again and again. And that's the idea of the economy as being a circular flow. And what that means is that the three major actors in our market economies are households, governments, and firms. And economic activity flows among those entities. So, for instance, households offer to firms their labor, and in some cases their property, in other cases their capital, and firms repay that in the form of wages, dividends, interest, profits, and rent. And from that income, households then are able to purchase goods and services that are offered by firms. And so that gets us to sort of a fundamental concept that you'll hear again and again, which is that in the economy, one person's expense is another person's income. So this is critically important as we think about the macroeconomy, particularly now in this era where we're getting a very steep increase in the number of people who are unemployed in the economy, and firms are cutting loose. Employees that they don't have work for right now as a result in some sectors of the economy, just because there's just not possible to open restaurants, say. But the elimination of their income or significant reduction of their incomes means that there will be a significant reduction in consumption on the other end. And we can see a very drastic downward spiral of consumption in the economy, save for the existence of what we'll talk about later on in the lectures, concept that we refer to as automatic stabilizers, or more to the point in this instance, fiscal policy and monetary policy that will help buoy the economy during a period of time when incomes are falling as a result of massive unemployment. So over the next series of lectures, there are ideas that we want to cover. So tomorrow night's session will begin the discussion of national income accounting and gross domestic product, how we measure economic activity in the economies, the ups and downs of that, and what works and what doesn't work. And then I'll discuss a couple of ideas that economists have documented about how economies grow, and so what you need to make economic growth. And then we'll spend some time talking about money, its uses, and the U.S. monetary system. What's the Federal Reserve? What's the role of the Federal Reserve? And then talk significantly about why economies contract, what causes recessions, there are various potential causes of them that we'll review. And then we'll talk about the price level in the macroeconomy. Is inflation a problem? When? How? Is deflation a problem? What kind of impact will that have in our coming period? And how we fight recessions with fiscal and monetary policy. What do we do about giant holes in demand in the economy like the one that we're facing now? And finish up with a discussion of currencies and the dynamics of international trade, because we'll be expanding our model of the macroeconomy to open it up to trade, which is an important component of the way we measure GDP. So as I go through these things, I'll be illustrating stuff with current events, talking about other resources that you can access that will help you understand what it is that we're doing. And I want to close tonight with a nicer note, which is some music from a performer that I saw yesterday doing an online concert, and thought this would be helpful